Gospel according to St. Luke, the 2nd chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was the governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and the family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver the child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. In that region there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of a great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom he favors." When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known what had been told them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned to glorifying and praising God for all that they had heard and seen as it had been told them. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, O Lord.
Please be seated. I love what I do as a pastor each and every day, but I especially love it at Christmas time. There's nothing like the anticipation, the expectation, and all the trimmings that go along with Christmas. And I especially love it when we get to watch it and see it through the eyes of children, with that anticipation of what may be under the tree on Christmas morning. I think as adults we like to reconnect to that feeling that we had as kids, because there's really nothing like that feeling of building up for most of us to Christmas Day and everything that it is. I think that's one of the many reasons why, even as an adult, I still love the coming of Star Wars movies, because it kind of builds the same way. There's a countdown to an event that's coming, right? Then you get there and the movie starts, and then when it's over, then you kind of decompress from it. You know, some years at Christmas, you feel really fulfilled. Other years, you might be thinking, oh, maybe Santa forgot to bring me one thing or another, right? And just for the record, I really like the latest movie, and I can highly recommend it. I think it's a good closure to the saga. But anyway, there's that joy of Christmas that we love and that feeling we like to get connected to. And for me, even as a young child, Christmas brought me a sense of peace and calm that I didn't find throughout the rest of the year. As many of you know, I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional household. By the time I was a teenager, both my parents were disability retired. They were home 24/7 with sickness. And this started them down the slippery slope towards prescription drug abuse. Because of that, our childhood home wasn't the warmest, coziest, or the cleanest place. Unless my sister and I did some cleaning up as young kids, things didn't really get the attention they deserved. And on top of that, my parents over time became hoarders. So there were piles of stuff everywhere. I remember my parents' bedroom. They had stacks and stacks of magazines, old magazines. I guess they were going to read them again one day, who knows. But when those stacks would slide over and fall over, they would just leave them. And I can't remember a time in my years of growing up where I could see my parents' bedroom floor around their bed. So this was what surrounded us the rest of the year, except at Christmas. Christmas was that one time of year where all the piles of garbage got replaced with beautiful decorations and lights and trees. And the house smelled good. The smell of cinnamon candles, the smell of baking going on during the season. So it was a time for a few weeks where I didn't mind being home. And that's not to mention then the joy and the anticipation of what was found under the tree on Christmas morning. I especially remember when I was a young child, before they really got sick. One of the great surprises on Christmas morning wouldn't just be the gifts under the tree, but there would be a train board with all sorts of trains that I would play for hours and weeks afterwards. And every year for Christmas, I would look forward to that next Christmas morning to see what had changed on the board, maybe what new trains were on the board that I could play with and I could enjoy. So even before I knew where my life was headed, even before I fully understood what the real gift of Christmas was all about, Christmas broke into the darkness of my life and my household and brought that light and that peace and that calmness that marks this season for us as the people of God. Have you noticed in recent years that Christmas seems to be creeping into our lives earlier and earlier and earlier? Now, of course, for a long time, stores have been getting ready for Christmas way before Thanksgiving. But what I'm talking about is the old taboo that usually homes, people, families never really decorated or started their Christmas celebrations until after Thanksgiving. But I've noticed in recent years, more and more houses, more and more families are decorating and getting going and getting their Christmas celebrations underway even before Thanksgiving. So I've started to ask myself, what's behind this? What's the reason? And what I think is going on is that as we as a society seem to be losing our faith in organized religion, and we keep getting disappointed by those old institutions that used to be cornerstones of our lives and our societies, as we keep getting disappointed by them over and over again, we're looking to recapture that feeling of hope and anticipation and excitement that Christmas used to bring to us as children. So we're clinging on to it sooner and sooner in the hopes of being comfortable and finding some joy again. In a certain sense, we're gambling on Christmas to bring us happiness and to bring us joy. It's interesting to look at the things that people put their faith and hope in to bring them fulfillment, to bring them happiness. There's far too many people that put their faith and their hope in government or a political party agenda only to be disappointed over and over and over again. And at this time of year, we're painfully aware of how so many people put a lot of faith and hope in materialism. The things that we have, the things we can get, the things that we can own. But what's really interesting is to look at the statistics of how many people put their faith and their hope in winning the lottery. You know, here in America, over $70 billion, billion a year are spent on lottery tickets. It's estimated that over 90 million Americans out of the over 300 million Americans, so that's well over 1/3 of the adults, legal buying age, are playing the lottery. The average that would be is over $225 a year the average person spends on lottery tickets. Yet the odds of winning any sort of substantial jackpot are 1 in 175 million. Those are some incredible odds that a lot of people are putting a lot of faith and hope in to get some sense of fulfillment, to get some sense of satisfaction. And yet, a lot of people think it's a great risk to put their faith in God and to believe in something bigger than themselves. When in reality, the odds of winning the lottery are a lot greater or a lot less than the odds of the Christmas story and everything that the Bible brings to us in being true. So I just want to talk for a minute about the risk of believing that this message, this night, and everything that it entails is true in our lives. Let's take the worst case scenario first. Let's say that the Christmas story and everything else that we read about in the Bible is just a good fantasy written by some really talented authors 2,000 or so years ago. And we believe in it, and we trust in it, and we live our lives by it, and then we die and find out it's not true because there's nothing there. What does that look like for us? Well, we live our lives knowing that everything's been created with a purpose and a value, so we have respect for life and for one another. We learn about forgiveness. We forgive and we let go of the grudges that so often can poison us and destroy us from the inside out. We learn about boundaries and rules, and we learn that they're for our good, to keep order. We are able to put our property and our possession in the proper perspective so that they don't rule and they don't own us. And then when we see others who may be in need, we are able to share out of the abundance to help them in their time of need. And we have hope even in the worst of situations. So if we live our whole lives believing in the Christmas story, and then it's not true, but those are all the things we've lived with, what have we lost along the way? Now let's take a better scenario. Let's say we've lived our lives according to those principles. We've lived our lives in faith, and the story of Christmas, Easter, and the rest of the Bible is true. What do we get out of that? Well, all the above, plus the blessed assurance that we're going to be united with those who have gone before us. We get answers to the questions that the world often doesn't have answers to. And we have all the time in eternity to do it all over again. But this time without all of the heartaches and the pain and the struggles that sin so often brings into our lives. So let's just talk about that one last bad scenario. What if it's all true? Bible, Christmas, Good Friday, Easter, all those things, and we don't believe it when we live our lives, and we don't live our lives by it? Well, actually, I don't really want to talk about that. I don't want to think about that. I think we just need to focus on the first two. Let's live our lives by faith, one way or the other, and then we'll let God sort it out in the end, right? Figure out what's true and not true. A gambit is a play where somebody takes a risk where they're hoping to gain some sort of advantage in the future. Usually a gambit involves a sacrifice early on in the hopes of some sort of future reward. As much as we love to put our faith and hope in so many things that are against the odds, as much as we love to gamble with our lives, there was no greater gambler than Jesus. The Christmas Gambit was that the second person of the Trinity gave up all of the glory of eternity to humble himself and become a baby and come into this world so that we know that God is not far off, that God is with us. The Good Friday Gambit is that great sacrifice. He was willing to give his own life for us, not for his advantage, but for our advantage. And the Easter Gambit was that he would rise from the grave on that Easter Sunday to show us that no matter what we face in our lives, no matter how great the odds may be against us, when God is on our side, we have nothing to fear. So we may love to gamble, but when we gamble with Jesus, we are winners and we have nothing to fear. That's what all these readings on Christmas Eve are all about. Listen to the promises and the risk that comes along with it. Isaiah, to people who were oppressed, people who were struggling, he says, you have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. Their situation would be reversed when they trusted the Lord. And Titus talks about Jesus' sacrifice. He it is who gave himself up for us, that he might redeem us from all iniquity and purify for himself a people of his own who are zealous for good deeds. And all that leads to the announcement of the angels. Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of a great joy for all the people. And speaking of all the people, my love of trains at Christmas, and I still have a train under my Christmas tree today, inspired me to go research why this connection, trains and Christmas, the Polar Express, all these things. And I was very surprised by what I found. In the 1700s, Moravian Christians emigrated to America and they landed in Pennsylvania. They brought with them their tradition of setting up elaborate nativity scenes. But as they grew and as they set their roots here in America, they started to expand upon their nativity scenes. They started putting some other biblical scenes, stories in there. And then they started putting in their farmhouses and their villages and other displays that represented where they lived. You want to know where your tradition of having a Christmas village is? If you set one up, this is where it finds its roots. Then in the 1800s, as trains became the popular form of transportation, they started adding cast iron trains to their elaborate displays. Then in the 1900s, with the invention of electric play trains, they were added to the display. And the motivation behind this was to be the reminder to the family and everyone who visited during Christmas that the message of the manger, the story of the good news delivered by the angels, was for everyone. All homes, all villages, and wherever the trains would travel, and wherever God would take people. So way back, when I was a little child, before I even knew that God would use me to focus on and celebrate the great real message of Christmas, that joy of the Trinity was rooted in the message of the angels, sharing the good news of the gospel. And the good news of great joy for each and every one of us tonight is that no matter what the risk may be in our lives, no matter how much we may feel like the odds are against us, when we look to Jesus, when we trust in Him, and when we place our faith and our fate in His hands, it's no gamble and risk at all. Amen.